Welcome to the Rant Live. Good morning, Mr. Evan Altman. I am John Furlise. I'm not John Strong anymore. I've changed back. And unfortunately, there are some things that I wish would change too. But we'll get to that here in just a second. But I'm glad to be alive, I guess.
Unlike the Cubs. Is that what you're saying?
When you're in a situation like this in life, you have to try to look outward. We're going to become a self-help podcast.
Oh, okay.
People.
Okay.
It's not about the Cubs anymore. This is about making your life better in the face of adversity.
So does that mean we just instruct people to not watch the Cubs anymore? Is that because that
Step
would
number
certainly
one.
improve the quality of life for a lot of fans.
You know, but the good thing is, let's look at it this way. I mean, for a good 4 or 5 years there, we Cubs fans, really, our summers were occupied. You know, I mean, we were watching a lot of baseball. We weren't getting out with the family as much. We weren't going hiking. You know, we weren't going on those trips. And so now, hey, look at it this way. Your summer is free.
Well, unless you plan to go to games at Wrigley, in which case it's anything but free. Although it is actually pretty cheap if you buy on the secondary market. I'll say that. Man.
I'll tell you what made me, what makes me angry is looking at the crowd last night. I'm so upset that the Cubs can have what appears to be a sellout on a Sunday night against the Dodgers, where they absolutely stood no chance whatsoever. And this is what Ricketts was talking about when he bought the team, to be honest with you. He said basically in those emails between him and his family that it doesn't matter what product you put on the field. The stands are always full.
Yeah, and I think the thing in where, you know, we can talk all we want about season ticket holders bleeding out like crazy, but at the end of the day, a lot of those folks are still showing up because they paid the money for the tickets, or you know, they're giving them away to somebody, or they're selling them at a tremendous loss, which is unfortunate for those season ticket holders. But if you can go on StubHub and get a ticket for $5, you know, it removes that barrier to like, oh, I'm not going to pay all this money to see a crappy team. And if it's only $5 and hey, it's a Sunday night at Wrigley, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, it's worth the entertainment value at that point. And so now, and we could sit there and say, well, the Cubs aren't getting anything out of that, but hey, man, if those are season tickets, they're already sold. They've already pocketed the money for that.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, it's like they could say they're losing money, or you know, you could make it seem like you're losing money if a $50 ticket had to sell for $5. But you know, it's not as if these are tickets that the Cubs had to buy first and now they're reselling them. If that seat's going to go empty versus somebody bought it for $5 and they get in there and they buy beer and hot dogs and whatnot, they still come out ahead. You know,
that's what I'm saying is that, like, obviously the Cubs sold all those tickets, regardless of what the people who are sitting in the tickets paid. Somebody paid market price, or whatever you want to call it, whatever the Cubs face value is for those seats. So they paid the Cubs, and they're sitting in those seats and they're buying beer and food and everything else. And so this, obviously, it's going to change. The thing is that when the weather starts to warm up in Chicago, especially around the Wrigley area, it's a neighborhood, right? I mean, and going out to Wrigley Field is something for the people who live in the neighborhood to do. It's like if you had a beautiful park, if you live by Central Park or some very nice park, you would go out to the park when it started to warm up. However, if there were, let's say, evil packs of birds that dive bombed you every time you went to that park, sure, you'd go for the first couple of weeks just because the weather's nice, but after a while, you're going to stop going. So I would imagine that the evil pack of birds known as the Chicago Cubs National League baseball team is going to drive people away come, you know, probably relatively soon. It depends. Let me ask you a question before we get to kind of into this is the rant, and you guys are going to fully experience why we call this show the Rant today. Did you expect the Cubs to be this bad?
No, not at all.
I mean, did you think it was even possible?
Like, if everything went wrong, which is kind of what's happening right now, I think as we talked about, like, this felt like it was going to be a mediocre team,
Yeah.
right? And there's a lot of gray area in mediocrity, and I think there was if things broke really well, then they could be a 500 plus team, and if things broke really poorly, they could be close to a 100 loss team. And unfortunately, after starting out fairly strong and looking, again, we're talking what 6-4 through their first 10, right? Because they got out to a couple of wins there early. Since they've been awful. Since those first 3 series, right? They won against the Brewers. They split because they only had the 2 games with Pittsburgh, right? And then they split with Colorado. So
They've won
I
3
guess that was
games
like 5.
since.
Was that 5-4 or whatever?
9-18 now.
Well, and then what? Did they get a win coming out of that Colorado? I mean, whatever the case, they've just been really bad since then, right? And they've been winning one. Actually, that's what it was, right? They won the first game against the Rays, and then they lost the next 2, and then they lost a series in Pittsburgh. They lost a series to the Braves. They've just gone 1 win in each of the last few, and then they've gotten swept in the last 2. And that is not the kind of thing, getting beat 5 games in a row, 6, 7 games in a row. Does it happen? Yes, but by and large, they're not even competitive in those games. We're seeing the 1 runs and the 2 runs that we were worried about with the teams before. Right. And they're doing it, I'll get into more of it later about some things that are very, very alarming to me. But, in the meantime, I think it's just a matter of they don't know who they are. And, they lack enough star power and like transcendent talent to create any kind of an identity. Even inside of that, they lack enough consistent talent to have an identity, I guess. But the other issue is now they're dealing with tons and tons of different injuries and performance issues. So again, as I said, the bottom is falling out because the worst, like everything bad that could happen is happening right now.
Well, and it's for me, like that Stroman injury was, it felt like, all right, if the Suns, I see I have the Suns on my brain because I live here in Phoenix and they're
actually playing in the playoffs. So maybe that's
they're not playing very well either. But so it just seemed like if the Cubs were going to win a game, it was going to be that game where Stroman pitched really well in his last outing. And it's like the Cubs had a good shot with Stroman on the hill, even if they only score 1 or 2 runs. Although going up against the Dodgers, it's hard to think you can contain them to 1 or 2 runs. You felt like if they had a chance to win one of those games, pick up that last game, that was it, right, with Stroman. And then suddenly, like moments before the lineup comes out, really as the lineup came out, they announced that Stroman was on the IL. And it was just like, have we found out, is it COVID?
It's COVID, yeah.
It is. So
they don't need to. They probably won't even officially announce it, but that's the only one. They put him on the IL without an injury designation. The only way you can do that is if it's COVID. So
does he have to be diagnosed with COVID, or could it be a close contact? Like, what are the? You know what I'm saying?
Honestly, I'm not even sure where the protocols have fallen. I believe he has to have tested positive. Well, and I don't know what his vaccination status is. Right? I think if you're vaccinated, then the close contact does not immediately warrant a quarantine. So I assume it's a positive test, but I don't know.
Still haven't heard anything about it. So we're only left.
We won't unless he announces it, because they won't with that. It's a HIPAA thing. The team won't announce it. He would have to confirm it along with his vax status. So I thought he had said he was vaccinated or something. And maybe I'm just confusing that with somebody else. I know Alzolay is and several others, Hendricks or whatever. But there's another guy, Advert Alzolay, right? Just almost forgot he was still on the team. Yeah, he tweets a lot and all that stuff, but man, the rotation is just a mess. The staff in general is a mess. We're seeing all kinds of problems with the hitters. Like,
Seiya Suzuki is a complete mess. I mean, he struck out 8 times in this 5-game home series. Was it 5? Yeah, 5 games. In 5 games, he struck out 8 times. He looks completely lost. I don't even know if he had. What did he have? 1 hit, maybe.
Yeah, he got one the other
2
day.
hits. Sorry, he had 2 hits in 8 games.
I'm sorry. Is there a comment over here that Wisdom is sitting out because he's frustrated? Wisdom's like the best hitting player on the team. He's not sitting out because he's upset with what the team is doing. If anything else, these guys want to play their balls off so they can get traded out of there or earn a bigger contract. Wisdom is their best hitter over the last 3 weeks, ever since that initial week when he was pretty terrible.
He dropped off these last few games.
Yeah, but he's still at like a 178 WRC plus or something like that over his last 69 plate appearances. Nice. I think since that first week, right? I mean, he's overall been their best hitter in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So there's no, you don't sit out because you're frustrated. You wouldn't, I mean, you bang up your ankle, you're going to keep going. But I know he's not a guy who would sit out for that reason. But Kyle made a note too that David Bodie's another guy that everybody forgot about. Yeah, like David Bodie. When's the last time you even said his name?
Just now.
Yeah. Before that, 2 months ago, 3.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, we don't even know about that guy. Well, he's not going to save the team. So the Cubs are on pace right now to be historically bad. Actually, the worst. They could have end up with the worst if they continue on this pace. They're going to have the worst record in the modern era, and by the modern era, I mean since they've been playing 162 games, and since the 60s.
Oh, the Reds are going to have something to say about that, man.
The Cubs. This is for the franchise.
Okay.
For the franchise.
Okay.
My bad. I should have clarified that. So they're on pace right now to win 54 games. So you never would have guessed that after they started 6-4, but they are right now on pace to win 54 games. And the fewest games they've won in the modern era was in 1962 and 1966. They won 59 games. I mistakenly compared this team to the 2013 Cubs, thinking, okay, 2014 is probably going to be a little rough, but then meaning 2023 was probably going to be a little rough again, but then 2024, you could probably start to see some competitiveness. But no, this team is actually more in line with the 2012 Cubs, which would put us 3 years away from competitiveness. The 2012 Cubs ended up with 61 wins. I think I predicted at the beginning of the season they'd have 65 wins. What did you predict?
I thought I was around 80. I mean, I thought they were going to end up being kind of 500-ish,
I felt bad about my prediction after they started so well.
Well, what's interesting is you noted that they are on this season pace to win 54 games. But did you know that if you go back to following the no-hitter was June 24th last year against the Dodgers, from that point,
I'm not gonna like this.
They're actually on a 54-game winning pace, right? 54-game pace. So it's not just this season. We're talking about going back to half of last season as well, some of which included a lot of those core players, right? A lot of which didn't. About a month of that included Rizzo and Javi and Chris Bryant, all those guys.
Yeah.
But they're bad, and it's not just this season. They've been bad for a long time, and I'll go ahead and share another troubling statistic with you as well while we're at it. So now let me ask you this first. Now this is not a powerful team, right? We've all made clear note of that. Supposed to be a hitterish squad, right? Go in there and make a bunch of contact, whatever. Now, what do you expect, John, that a hitterish, contact-laden, contact-heavy team would be one that would attempt at least to spray the ball all over the yard?
You would think, yeah, like some opposite field.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, of note, and again, we're only a month into the season here and change, but so far this Cubs team is actually pulling the ball 43.1%. That is their highest pull rate since 2005. And they also have the lowest slugging and the lowest ISO out of that entire period. So not only are they pulling the ball more, right, when teams shift even more than ever, but they're hitting for less power than they have in the last 17 years. More pull, less power, more shifts.
What is bad combination for 500?
Yeah, exactly. And more like 333 with the way their winning percentage is, right? And so That is just, and we did, somebody noted on Twitter that it did look like last night they were trying to go Oppo a little bit more. So, one game I is really tough
Yeah.
to judge.
Yeah.
Was that just a take Walker Buehler gave him, whatever? But man, it is so like we've noted the double play issues, and actually a couple teams have jumped ahead of them in terms of the number of double plays, which is nice because it does look like
Evan's
Ross
wife,
has been getting
Evan,
guys
it's either
going,
your signal.
I don't know if
either you're getting blurry and bouncing
know,
in and out, or it's me. From my perspective, it's you. But
it's probably me. It's probably I'm like the Cubs.
You're in and out. They're not in much actually, but you're out. You're out a lot.
They're not. But either way, the point,
a lot of unexplainable stuff going on.
Yeah, attempting to make is it's just they're doing the exact opposite of what they need to do.
I will say this: that if Jed Hoyer is trying to be bad, he is very good.
Yeah,
he is exceptional. He's the best GM in baseball. If they're trying to do this, he has put together a team, and even with some of the guys that you got to feel bad for the kind of the few guys who probably aren't going to get traded, and maybe we should just transition into that topic. Is when you look at the team, I mean, you're thinking Wilson Contreras is definitely gone, and he's not doing terrible. He's starting to pick it up a little bit. His power numbers are really bad, but average wise, he's doing okay. It's like we know the guys who are definitely most likely to be traded, right? That's going to be. Would Stroman be on that list?
I think he would be. I think he kind of has to be. Given the short-term deal
Hendricks.
And all that. Yeah, Hendricks, entirely possible. I mean,
okay, so I'm going to write it down. Okay, Hendricks, Stroman. Who else on the pitching staff?
I mean, just about anybody in that bullpen. Robertson.
Think?
I mean, right?
Of course, Robertson.
Why? If you're only on a 1-year deal, right? Or if you're one of these guys that brought in on a minor league deal who then got into a 40-man contract on the 26, like why keep them, right? I mean, they've done that all the time. They did that with Chafin. They did it with. I'm trying to think of all the other guys, but they.
What about Keegan Thompson?
Like crazy. No, he'll stick around. A guy that young with that much more control.
Because he's got. Is this his first full year?
Yeah, he came up last year. So this is his first full season. So I mean, he's still got.
So he's got 6 more years.
Yeah.
Including this year, 6 years, right?
Yeah, including this year.
Can we talk about that just real quickly, the whole service time issue? So there's obviously a lot of guys, and we won't get into the minor league system right now, but there's a lot of guys down in the minor leagues that are really good, that are really crushing it. And there are even guys that weren't on the list of kind of who you expected to really start crushing it, that are crushing it. And so there's a totally different vibe in the minor league system than there is, and that's at every level, than there is on the Chicago Cubs. And so it's like when you bring a player up, so if they bring a player up this year, when does the service time clock start? Meaning, how long does a player have to be up? Man. So the moment
172.
That's when you accumulate a year. So I'm asking a different question.
Mm-hmm.
The question I'm asking is, does the service time clock start the moment they get added to the roster?
Yes.
So no matter what, if you bring a player up this year, their service time clock has started.
Yes.
And their first year of service will be next year, no matter how long they're up.
Well, as long as at this point they can't accumulate a year. Right, because that was the whole thing with.
So they'd have 7 years of control if you included this year. I get that. I don't want to get into that quite yet. The question that I'm asking you is that clock starts automatically the moment they hit the roster, meaning
yes, when they're on the active roster.
So if they were brought up today and they were on the active roster for just a day, their Major League Baseball service time clock starts, and they have a day.
But then if they're moved back off the roster, then they're not accumulating service time. They have to be on the active roster, or not on the 60-day if they're on the IL or whatever, right? As long as they're on that 26-man roster, Now, if they get bumped back, right, and they go back
That's
to the
what I'm
minors,
saying. So let's say they
they
come
can
up
start and stop.
and they get bumped back. So they haven't started. Right? They've got a day.
Yeah.
And they get bumped back. And then they stay in the minor leagues until 2024.
Yep.
They still don't have a year of service time.
Right.
And the Cubs bring them up, say, mid-year, and they keep them up. And they stay on the major league roster. And so at that point, you've started accumulating your service time. And from basically 2024 on, they still have 6 years, 6.5 years.
Yeah. I mean, you got to have that, whatever it is, I forget if the league year is like 173 games, you got to have
172.
Yeah. So you have to have 162.
No, the league year is 187 days.
Okay, yeah. So you have to,
and you have to have 172 days.
Yep.
Basically,
so it's that
15
number.
days.
So once you've accumulated that number, right? So the thing is, though, is service time really doesn't matter for somebody who's going to be bounced back and forth because they're not someone that the team really gives a shit about trying to gain extra control over. If you're bouncing back and forth, it doesn't really matter. And if you are good enough, then you're going to stay up, right? And keep it up with that. So I don't think that'll be much of a consideration, with any of these. They're not going to, I mean, at this point, they're past the point of manipulating for a year, of making it transparent, right? Like it was.
Well, and so here's why I'm asking you the question, though, is because, yes, we're past the point of where they would accumulate a full year of service time. So if you brought anybody up from the minor league system to the Chicago Cubs right now and beyond for the rest of the season, they would not accumulate a full year of service time. That full year would be next year, assuming they stayed up.
Yeah, they'd hit their full year next year. Yep.
And so the trick in this, and kind of where I'm going with all of this, is to say, all right, so you have to start thinking about service time for Brendan Davis, for example, in terms of, do the Cubs want him on the team next year for a full year? Do the Cubs want any of these minor leaguers on the team next year for a full year? And I think the answer to that is no. And so that's where I get off. And I know people are saying, Brendan Davis is definitely going to be called up this year, and maybe he does, but then he gets bounced back to AAA. And this is where I'm going with this, is that, do you see any of the minor leaguers accumulating a full year of service time? And when I say any of the minor leaguers, I mean any of the high ceiling guys accumulating a full year of service time next year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, unless they go the 2013 route and sign a bunch of dudes who, you go out and you get your Jerry Hairston Juniors and that sort of thing.
It's basically what they did this year. Yeah,
I mean, if they do that for a second year, I mean, and I still think, right? I still think they have done irreparable damage, as far as the organization, to kind of the goodwill, right? I mean, I've been saying that for a while, but I think there's a serious problem because, at least in the past, like when Theo and Jed first blew into town, we knew they were going to be uncompetitive. We knew they weren't going to spend money for a while, but they flat out lied when they said we have the resources to be competitive. We're going to spend money to be competitive. Unless they truly believe Stroman and
every
Suzuki
year that was the goal,
right? But I'm saying, like, this year, heading into this year, like, they flat out, both Jed Hoyer and Tom Ricketts both said we have the resources. We will spend the money to be competitive. That didn't happen. It's not happening. And so this is the first time that where we've really seen them essentially lying, for lack of a better term.
And you can't point to Seiya Suzuki and Marcus Stroman. They can't point to those two signings,
right? That wasn't enough.
Living up to it, because Seiya Suzuki is, as far as I'm concerned, listen, the guy's got great potential. I think he's going to probably end up winning Rookie of the Year. I was hopeful he'd continue to rake and win MVP honors, or at least be in the conversation. That doesn't seem like it's going to continue. But Suzuki is a marketing play. And listen, he's a great player. You want him on the team, this, that, and the other thing. But there's a huge market in Japan that is buying Cubs gear, that are watching Chicago Cubs games. And I'm not saying that for any reason other than that's the reality of the situation. And I believe that's why Tom Ricketts was at that meeting, because he felt that it was so important to get a market of people who would watch the games regardless of how good or bad the Cubs are.
Right. And I do think, though, I will say, I think he is a piece long term,
for sure.
But he is not. He's he and Stroman are very similar in that regard. In that Marcus Stroman, again, can be an excellent pitcher. He is not, to me, he is not a staff ace on a team that's expected to
He's
be
at 3.
a division winner. I could put him at 2 at best, or if he's the ace, you've got to have a hell of a lot better 2 through 5, right?
Well, let's do it this way.
5 of him to be that.
Let's look at the staffs that are very good in baseball right now. On the Dodgers, what is he?
3.
That's my point. If you want to be there on the 2016 Cubs, what is he?
Yeah, I mean, he might even be 4 on that team.
Yeah,
I mean, if you maybe bump him behind Hendricks, but yeah, it's neither of them. So they were both effective pieces of what, and I said this at the time with both. I said this about Wade Miley. I said this when they got Stroman. I said it when they got Suzuki. Each one of those, based on what they had told us, right? And this is what you get if you say, well, that's what you get for taking these guys at their face value. All of those moves, based on what they had said, signaled bigger moves to follow them, or at least a much bigger move, because none of them individually and even collectively were nearly enough to truly make the team competitive. I mean, I think we knew that, right? And that's where I wrote about that. We've talked about it on here, and that's what never happened. The other shoe never dropped, and that's when you're left with a team that again, when you don't spend enough money on it, and when you don't have enough of the young talent coming up, it's a small trickle, and primarily in the bullpen now. But you leave yourself in a situation where, as we discussed at the start of the show, you have a team that has so much margin, one way or the other, this tremendous gray area where if things either break really well, then you can be okay. And if things break really bad, you can be really bad. They did not build in any kind of fail safes to this team at all. There was nothing. There's no parachute. You are on the trapeze without a safety net, baby. And if you miss that bar, you were going to go splat. Speaking of which, there's a fantastic video where somebody edited some Spider-Man clips to where Spider-Man doesn't quite make it real well. I forget where it is out there. I think I saved it. I should share it because it's pretty hilarious. But anyway, that's what the Cubs are doing right now. Right? The idea was that Spider-Man's going to clear that helicopter blade, and instead he sails right into it and ends up as spider chunks. Brett Taylor actually, or Bleacher Nation, one or the other. I don't know if it's the same individually or Bleacher Nation, but
they're both the same.
Retweeted out there. Yeah, same person doing it, but check it. I know that it got retweeted, I think on Friday or Saturday, but that's the issue here, is that they just did not. This team was not built to be able to withstand any kind of significant, whether we don't even need to call it hardship, but just any getting sideways at all, right? Yeah, and that's where we're at. So unless they do spend money, like that's the thing. I don't know if you heard it. So Boog Shambi was on which is kind of weird when you turn on ESPN now. I'm like, oh, familiar voice, right?
For Sunday Night Baseball.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. But
it's
they're
better
than
Justin
Turner. But they were, but the Dodgers, right, they're what the Yankees were in the 90s. They're, because a lot of people talk about them spending money, but they also have made very, very savvy pickups. They've done an amazing job of developing internal homegrown talent, so that when you have a guy like Justin Turner, who they picked up off the scrap heap, and Max Muncy, who they picked up off the scrap heap, and Walker Buehler, who they drafted, even though he was going to have Tommy John the very next day, right out of Vanderbilt, and then he comes up. Clayton Kershaw has come up through the system. They trade for Mookie Betts. They signed Freddie Freeman. They got Cody Bellinger, who came up. They don't even care that they just lost Seager, because they can just move on. But you have to develop internally. You have to make smart moves in free agency, and you have to sign big-time players and make big-time trades. The Cubs have done dick in that regard over the last, again, outside of getting everybody up in 15.
And I think it's important to remember that the Cubs and the Dodgers were at the same starting point back in 2016.
The Dodgers had a much better farm system, a development system, but
because Theo traded away some pretty key pieces. I mean, Dylan Cease, that burns, because he's probably the best pitcher in the American League right now.
Yeah, but hey, the Cubs got Jose Quintana.
Yeah, which worked out really well. And so, I mean, the downside to Theo and what that regime did is they didn't do is they weren't able to build up the farm system. And so that was pretty bad. The Cubs are on a really futile set of under a futile set of circumstances here. Their run production is bad. People, they're giving up I think 4.5 runs per game, and
That's actually better than I thought.
they're averaging 3.82 per game now to runs per game. Now, to put that into perspective, back in 2012, the Cubs averaged 3.78 runs per game.
So they're better than 2012. Yeah.
They're better than 2012, but they also scored 21 runs in a game and 9 runs in a game, right? So if you remove those 29 runs and those 2 games, they are averaging under 3 runs a game, which would be historically bad.
That feels more on the nose.
Their run differential isn't very good either. And let's just go to this current homestand. So they've scored 14 runs since April 26th, 7 runs in a 5-game homestand. 7 runs. That's not good. Their average was 167. They scored, like I said, 7 runs, and they had 3 home runs. I didn't go back to look to see. I don't know how many of those home runs. There were a couple that were solo home runs, but I don't know if they were all solo home runs. I tend to think they were. Maybe one was a 2-run home run. So 3 or 4 of those 7 runs came via the home run. Their on-base percentage was for this contact-heavy lineup was 231. Cool. And their slug was 269.
Oh.
Both Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki struck out 8 times. And I mean, listen, folks, I don't want to be negative, but listen, at some point in time, you have to at least look at the historical significance of how bad this team is. And I tweeted the other day, don't worry, it's May. That was really facetious because it's like, yeah, you should actually be very concerned. It's almost like it's May 9th. I mean, like, things have gone historically bad. And it is only May 9th. I mean, when other teams start to play the Chicago Cubs, it's they're looking to score a lot of runs. And I just don't know if the Cubs are better than any team in baseball, and that includes the Cincinnati Reds,
who they get to play. I mean, are we at all? So here's, I guess, where I come down on it. You can look at this 2 different ways. Okay, they've got to go out to San Diego, where apparently Frank Schwindel is going to be, whether that's as a taxi squad member, whether Wisdom is hitting the IL and Schwindel is going to immediately be brought back without even having to have really gone down to Iowa. They got 3 games in San Diego. Then they got a day off. They get 3 against the Diamondbacks, 3 back at home with the Pirates, 4 at home against the Diamondbacks. Then they're at Cincinnati for 4 games. So that's going to
be the series of the season right there.
That's 14 games against really bad teams, other really bad teams. Now, how do we look at that? Do we look at that as, hey, here's a possibility for them not to entirely right the ship and suddenly rewrite their whole narrative, but they could, climb out of their nosedive, right? Steady this thing out and kind of trend back toward some semblance of mediocrity? Or do we look at that and say, this team is playing like crap right now, and if they go through that 14-game stretch and go like 6-8, 7-9, God forbid, worse, then they buried themselves completely. Like that 14-game stretch, it can't. I don't want to say it could make the season because that's kind of silly at this point.
It could stop it from breaking.
Right. It puts a Band-Aid. Maybe it's a few stitches on the open wound. But they could absolutely flush it entirely down the toilet. If they have a losing stretch over that, hell, even going even would not be a bad thing. But if you have a losing stretch against those teams in that succession, I mean, that's the easiest portion of their schedule they're going to have, right? So, man, I don't know. How do we look at that? How do you look at that? Do you see this as a potential to be a really good thing, or do you think there's greater potential that they fuck it all up so bad with that it just light the thing on fire and push it out into the water and hope it doesn't set the rest of the neighborhood ablaze?
this is how I look at it. The Cubs are 2-4 against Pittsburgh so far this season. That's how I look at it.
Yeah.
Arizona is actually not playing badly. As somebody just mentioned in our comments, they're pitching well. And so, yeah, I see this as being really bad. I think that, what are the Cubs now? They're 9-18. They've got 3 against the Padres. So let's say they manage to win one of those games, and that puts them at 10-20 going to Arizona, which, what if they win? Oh, what is that? 10 games against the Pirates and the Diamondbacks combined. They could go 2-8 in those as badly as they're playing right now. Like, and the fact that they're already 2-4 against the Pirates, and the fact that the D-backs are not playing nearly as poorly, I mean, they could be very close to where the Reds are. And that's what I'm saying is that, like, listen, people.
And they could split with the Reds. They could go so conceivably they could go 4-10 out of 14 games against the D-backs, Pirates, and Reds. That's not inconceivable. In that stretch.
Yeah. Yes. I would say that would be kind of the expectation.
In fact, it's very conceivable, and that's kind of the problem. It'd be really unfortunate because of the if the Supreme Court decision holds, the Cubs can't abort this series or this upcoming season, just in general, the rest of it. God, that was a bad joke.
That was terrible.
I'm going to hell.
Listen,
see Ricketts there.
Yeah. So you actually have to embrace the suck, I think, is what it comes down to. I still am watching every single game, obviously. I mean, it becomes very difficult to, we run a blog, we run CubsInsider.com. It becomes very difficult to write positive stuff without being a complete meatball. Listen, if you want to be a meatball and you want to feed the fans your meatballness, then you can do that. But if you want to be even have a hair of realism in what you do and what you put out there, which I think is the angle we try to take, we'll take the meatball-y path when it's worth putting someone or something up on your shoulders, because what happened is ridiculously awesome. But there's no ridiculously awesome things happening right now. And so that's where the meatball fan in me kind of dies, to be honest with you. And it just becomes reality of, this is going to be a long, hard season. Let's try to take the, whatever positives you possibly can. I think having Seiya Suzuki as a signing is a huge positive for the Cubs. I think what Keegan Thompson has done so far and is doing and what he's shown is a huge positive for the Cubs. I think Ian Happ has a tremendous amount of upside, and I think that's exciting, but he may get traded. And I think if you look at the minor league system, I know it's hard. And even when we post things on our website about the minor league system, that is ridiculous right now. We just don't get a lot of traffic. And that's just because the people they come because they want to watch the Cubs. They care about the Chicago Cubs. And I think the vast majority of your casual fans, which is what makes up the majority of most fan bases, isn't interested in the minor league team. But there is a lot to be excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's kind of interesting because I know that, again, back in 12, 13, 14, 14 really it kind of peaked because that was right before all the guys started to come up. There had been a shift, because but that took 2 or 3 years for it to effectively happen to where there was more interest in what Javi Baez or Chris Bryant did in the minors that night before. And part of that, I think, there just wasn't nearly as much coverage on the minor leagues. Nobody had MILB.TV. You just didn't see as much out there as what there is now. So, yeah, I don't think we're far enough into this skid, even, because, again, we got to look at about midpoint last year, really the end of June, right? Because through May and June, they look pretty damn good and had just no hit the Dodgers. I mean, things were exciting. And the very start of this season, things were exciting. So it until people fully embrace that this Cubs team is not very good and not worth watching, which a lot of them have gotten to, right? But I mean, there is a delay. It's like kind of like hearing your echo or whatever. It's dropping a rock down a well. That that it's going down there, it takes a while for that rock to maybe splash. And I say that in terms of like those of us who are very close to it, or people who follow us really closely, who interact, who are kind of more into the inner workings of it, are going to realize things a lot sooner than like my dad or somebody, who maybe it'll hit later, and who again, honestly doesn't have as deep an attachment anyway. So I think that'll be a while. It's difficult, and I'm honestly kind of thankful for the time being that you've kind of taken over some of the duties on the site for a while, and because it's
literally duty.
Yeah, it is duty, and it's funny because somebody asked earlier about my hat, so I'll bring that. So this is excuse me, this is Team Indiana. This is my son's travel team. His third travel team in under a year for reasons we will not get into here. Suffice to say, I showed off a little bit of pettiness this past weekend. But anyway, I was at the ball field, like all day Saturday, a good chunk of Sunday, part of Friday, so it's like, it's been nice to sort of step away, although, the outcomes weren't always where we wanted them to be. I was fully invested in those. And it's great because I'm not even coaching, which is even better. I just get to run. I bought one of those monster, portable stereos, portable speakers. And so I like run the warm-up music, which is it's kind of fun. But anyway, it's been nice to sort of step away from it and to sort of hit the reset button on some of these things. And to be quite honest, I would kind of recommend that to folks every once in a while, right? This team is not such that you're not going to miss a whole lot. Step away for a couple games, right? It's not like 2016 where like you might see something really cool happen every night and you really wanted to watch because you were going to see them.
Yeah, you never knew.
To win. This is like they're going to find new ways to lose, and you end up being frustrated. So
it is the exact opposite.
Yeah, it's nice to honestly hit that reset for a while, kind of come back.
This is where you pay dues, people.
Yeah, but part of it is like, I think resetting the angle on it, because there is a point at which it can just get so negative, and as you said, there's a point where consistent negativity it's not that I want to be a meatball and whatever, right? But I don't want to just keep doubling down on the same three things that I'll say about how shitty this team is. There does come a point where you're like, hey, this kind of sucks, but let's find something cool. Let's write about Keegan Thompson. I wrote about Scott Efros the other day. Let's find an area, whether it be Ian Happ, whether it be just what is something that's going well. And in this case, to be the bullpen, which has thrown more innings in the starting rotation, which is not a good thing by any stretch. But if you look at the strikeouts and the things that the bullpen is doing, they are among the best in terms of strikeout rate and K per nine and things like that in the National League, in the majors, right? So there are some good things. Now, several of those guys might be traded here before too long. We're looking at like Robertson and Givens and guys like that who have a high upside, who they can get a lot more for than what they're paying.
Oh, they're going to be traded.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
there's
sure
no doubt about that.
But there is just, if you look at the bigger, I mean, how many times have we said that though? Like the Cubs bullpen, by and large, over the last, let's say, decade or more, has been pretty good. And outside of a couple guys, or if we look at, what's his nuts from Colorado, I can picture the guy's face who walked everybody. Chatwood, jeez,
yeah,
Tyler Chatwood. Outside of him being
the guy who walked everybody,
yeah, oh yeah, Chatwood. Aside from him having to be forced into the bullpen, they haven't gone out and spent a ton of money on those guys. They've cobbled stuff together. They've pulled guys up from the minors. They've signed dudes to minor league deals and kind of picked guys up on 1 year, and they've done a really good job year after year. They've proven that they can build a bullpen. Now, they have not proven they could build a rotation outside of a little bit of good luck, for a couple years at a time. So those are the kind of things that you want to kind of follow up on and see, can they continue to do that elsewhere? Because it feels like, I don't know, intentional or not, that they try to build an entire roster with that same mentality of like, we'll just kind of pick all these guys up and
now that doesn't work.
Yeah, like,
we know that,
especially when they all keep getting hurt, right? And now we're like, hopefully they'll get some reinforcements. The only problem is, by the time those guys are ready, will the other players be good to go, right? It's just they keep dropping like flies. So we'll see. But hey, maybe Andrelton Simmons will save it all.
I love this comment by Susan Varing Kearns. She says, "What is going on? This is worse than any rebuild I remember, and I'm old."
I only remember
and
one
so
actual rebuild, so most of them they just like
this is worse than any season I remember. And I will say that we've been fans for a very long period of time. I saw some idiot make a comment to one of our writers as if they were a bandwagon fan because they had commented on how bad this actually was. People, this is historically bad. And this goes back to when I started watching the Cubs all the way back in the 80s. I don't ever remember a team offensively being this offensively bad.
yeah.
There is, you can go back and go to Baseball Reference and look at it. And I did go back and I quoted the numbers earlier in the show. This is this team right now from an offensive perspective is on pace to be the worst Chicago Cubs team in the modern era. And so when there are people out there making comments, listen, man, nobody's happy with this. No one's like jumping up for joy because the Cubs are so terrible. So let's not be a dick to each other while we're at it. Okay. So let's just all kind of be a little bit supportive of each other instead of trying to find ways to disagree.
Yeah.
Let's just try to find ways to put your arm around each other and maybe go have a beer.
And this is not, I want to make it clear, neither that nor what I will say is directed at Susan. I think there is validity in being a fan and having seen a lot. I think, and this is not what Susan was doing, but when people decide that they are a better fan because they've been simply because they were born earlier, right? Is like really kind of silly when you see that a lot. Well, I've been watching since, it's like great, good for you. But Susan makes the point, right? Like this is the worst I've seen, and I've seen a lot. Whereas other people are like, oh, you think this is bad? Oh, look at the 1971 season, or whatever, right? They'll just. But it's like, we don't need to compare. Like, just this is bad.
We don't need to compare really how bad you feel versus how bad I feel versus how bad you felt at some point in the future. This is historically bad.
If you're somebody who is saying, well, back in my day, well, okay, back when there were 16 teams or whatever, there's 30 teams. So if you're shitty in a 15-team league when the talent is that much more, now granted, we've got all kinds of different things we can kind of measure that out. So, well, the training and the access to the international players and how this all comes up, there's more really good athletes now, but there's more teams. The overall talent pool is spread out more. So to be that bad in a league that is twice as big or 50% larger or whatever, that's even worse, right? That doesn't mean those old teams. And hell, part of the reason, like when PK Wrigley was running the show, another guy, that was even more transparently bad than what the Ricketts are doing when they just didn't care, right? And so you knew year after year, I mean, they were lovable losers. That was part of their mantra. That was part of the thing. That's supposed to have been gone. And, when they say they're going to spend money, when they say they're going to compete, and then this happens, again, there are absolutely extenuating circumstances here, and I don't think even Hoyer could have predicted. I don't think he was out there thinking he had a 90-win team, but I don't think he thought he had a 100-loss team either. Based on nor should they be, right? This isn't the team that went 6-4 out of the gate, but I mean, and that doesn't sound like much, but you extrapolate 6-4 over the course of the remainder of the season, and you're actually going to have a pretty good record.
Very good record.
But again, I figured this was like a 75 to, my thought was like 75 to 85 or, 70. There was much more potential downside than there was upside, but I figured like 70 at the low end based on how that stuff. And that's not acceptable, right? It's simply not, because that didn't have to happen. This is not something, if you were someone who truly believes that the Cubs had to do this, that they had to cut payroll, that they had these awful losses that they needed to mitigate, that is a lie. Okay? It's simply not true. They could easily, I'm not saying they got to have a top payroll, they could easily be spending more money than what they are. They have to be spending more money than what they are because of the way things are built, because of the way the farm system was. You have to spend until that is ready, and then you still need to spend. Again, the Dodgers are not backing off of their spending, despite the fact that they've got a great farm system, and that's why the Dodgers are really freaking good. But I digress.
Yeah. It's not good. There's nothing good about it, but it is kind of where we are.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the Padres series. I don't even know if there's a reason to look forward because the only person that we know that's going to be pitching is Kyle Hendricks. There's no pitchers named for the next 2 games. Although I will say Mackenzie Gore, who's an incredible prospect for the San Diego Padres, is pitching tonight. So maybe tune in for that.
Cool.
And see if Kyle Hendricks can bounce back and see if the Cubs are not going to average 2 runs a game for the rest of the season. I don't think.
No, it might go 1.5.
Yeah, maybe they get worse. Maybe they get better.
Even worse.
Something's bound to change over these next 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 10, 20, 50, 100. But we'll be here covering it for all of you guys for your entertainment, torturing ourselves for your entertainment. That's what we do. So, hey, yeah, we'll circle back after the San Diego Padres series and let you guys know what happens there. Hopefully it's not a sweep. When I say sweep, I don't mean that for the Cubs because I would find that to be highly unlikely, but you never know. We'll see.
Yeah.
So until then, thanks for joining us, everybody. Hope you had a good one. Have a good week.